Welcome back to Big Mouth and welcome to the Big Mouth Daily. Remember, you can tag, speak to me, say hi to me and follow me over on Twitter at Movies TV Mad. Now today, let's just pretend Barry Allen has come round and said, I want to take you through the Speed Force. I want to take you to the multiverse, right? So in today's kind of Big Mouth Daily, we're going to pretend that we live in a parallel universe where Batman vs Superman Dawn of Justice does not exist. Instead, we are going with David Goyer's original plan, which was a Man of Steel 2, a Man of Steel sequel. But Mick, BVS is a Man of Steel sequel. Yes, it's a different version of a Man of Steel sequel, but it's not the one originally planned by Goyer. We talk about Zack's plan, but in fact, it was David Goyer who had the plan. He had Man of Steel and a Man of Steel sequel mapped out in his head. We know the story. He was writing The Dark Knight Rises. He came up with a movie idea for Superman. Christopher Nolan, his friend and his work partner, took it to Warner Brothers and they said, hey, you're responsible for this Dark Knight trilogy, or soon will be, if David can carry on writing The Dark Knight Rises, that is. So you can do whatever the fuck you want, right? So anyway, so David Goyer had a plan. So where does Zack's plan come into it? Well, Zack's plan kind of comes into it when he took over the whole thing, which was BVS. And something we're going to talk about as we go on in this video. You see, we have to look at what happened here. Now, anything I say to you today isn't fact. I don't know this for sure. It's the way I see things. As far as I'm concerned, David Goyer had written a Man of Steel 2. But Warner Brothers wasn't happy with the Man of Steel box office. They were looking to gross well over $1 billion. And a Superman movie, by the way, should be grossing over $1 billion. Put your bias to one side. I, of course, love Batman vs Superman Dawn of Justice. But it's interesting. If you talk to audiences as a whole, they'll tell you that they prefer Man of Steel to BVS. And I think we're talking about a mainstream audience. Now, it's not like Man of Steel didn't hold a polarizing discussion and a reaction, but it wasn't as polarizing, and I suppose it wasn't as damaging as Batman vs Superman. Again, for the pie eaters at the back, I loved that film, right? But I also liked the plan of David Goyer, and I'm sure Christopher Nolan would have returned for the Man of Steel sequel, Man of Steel 2, to co-write David's story with him. It would have been the same team, Zack directing and initiating how the film looked, and that would be his vision. But this was always David Goyer's vision. But once Man of Steel didn't make the clear over $1 billion at the global box office, they went, right, you're gone. We're not dealing with you anymore. So Zack Snyder brings in Ben Affleck, and Ben Affleck brings in Chris Terrio. It changes everything. Now, basically, Terrio seemed to me he was slaughtering David Goyer's original idea. Now, I don't know if it's David Goyer he's talking about, or he had to adapt the original Batman vs Superman story from years ago. Who knows? Who knows what was going on? So, what kind of film would have David Goyer's Man of Steel 2 been? Well, I think one thing's for sure, we would have been looking at maybe a Brainiac story. I'm kind of sure of that, and I think we definitely would have been looking at the Codex and continuing that story. So for those who kind of can't keep up or don't focus on things that happen in films, what is the Codex? The Codex is a template for the DNA of Kryptonian cells. It's how they create life forms. They don't have sex, they don't have intercourse, they don't mate. They clone their life forms. So what Jor-El did before he sent the baby Kal-El to Earth, he took that template and he put the cells of 1 billion Kryptonians inside of his son, right? So this is the storyline I think that would have continued in David Goyer's movie. And I must admit, I was very disappointed at that element of BVS not dealing with the Codex whatsoever. It was something that worked so well for me, the fact that David had come up with this concept that Kryptonians now clone people rather than, mate and do it that way. And they hadn't done that for a very long time. And Jor-El and Lara decided that they were going to have the first natural child in, in generations, in decades, in whatever kind of Kryptonian time frames that are used on Krypton, right? So I love that idea. It's an excellent idea, and it's actually a clever way to recreate a new Krypton, if you like. Now, so I think that's what he was going for. Now, why I think that David Goyer's sequel would have had Brainiac is because Brainiac can use the Codex to his advantage. He can literally extract the cells and control those Kryptonian life forms as soldiers. Right? We know what Brainiac is in the comics. He's a collector. He's the ultimate collector, right? He's a great villain, as we saw in the Krypton TV show that David Goyer had originally conceived. In fact, that's probably more of a Man of Steel 2 from David Goyer's point of view and David Goyer's story than BVS's. And so I do feel that I have mentioned, we have grappled this subject before here on Big Mouth, that David Goyer was done dirty because of the box office of Man of Steel. But if we look at the box office of Man of Steel, it was at that time it was competitive with other origin superhero movies, comic book movie adaptations. It was competitive. It was as successful as the first Spider-Man film, not the second one because it wasn't even a sequel. But the first one, it was competitive with that. It equaled the kind of money that they made, or maybe it made a little bit more. I can't remember. But it was competitive. It wasn't that bad. But Warner Brothers felt, this is a Superman movie. Superman needs to be making more money. So when they had the trouble with BVS, they started to think to themselves that, it's not the right time to do Superman. Not that they're not capable of doing Superman, that it's people don't want to watch Superman. And this is why we haven't seen Cavill's Superman since Justice League, really, apart from the body double in Shazam. And I mean, make what you want from that, right? So they lost faith in Superman. But any character that you create, fictional, whether it's an existing iconic IP or something new that you've created, can only be as good as you, the creative, makes it. It's not impossible to make a Superman that everyone loves, like everybody loved Tony Stark in the MCU. It's not impossible. You just have to have the ability to do it. Now, we know Man of Steel was controversial. We know they started with this polarizing movie from day one, and it was problematic, and it was all about the neck snapping of Superman. But even so, I think that we didn't get the toxicity with Man of Steel as we did with BVS. There's no question about that. If you're asking me if they should have went with Goyer and Nolan's story for a sequel, yes, I think they should have. And I think they panicked and they went with Batman versus Superman, and they took a Man of Steel sequel and brought Batman into it. It's very wrong. Batman deserved his own story, his own origin story, whether that's an older Batman or whatever they were going to do with it. That would have been something that Ben Affleck wrote and directed from the very off before we saw him in any other movies. Now, I like interconnected universes. I like seeing crossovers, and it's great. But the problem is we hadn't even met Ben Affleck's Batman before, and he was already sharing the screen with Henry Cavill's Superman. So I would have taken a punt on David Goyer. I think David Goyer would have got it right. And I also think the whole neck snapping thing would have been dealt with in the way I would have liked it to have been dealt with, in the sense of Superman saying something like, I've killed before, I won't do it again. Or I think that Goyer would have used that, because it was Man of Steel was Goyer's vision. It was his and Christopher Nolan's story, and it was Goyer's script. But they pushed Goyer away. And that's problematic to me, because already you've got Man of Steel, which is another person's vision. And all of a sudden you're saying, nah, get rid of him. Right, Zach, it's down to you now. How'd you do that? Of course there's going to be problems. As great as I feel that Batman versus Superman is, I think this guy Goyer had a vision, and you go with it, and you allow him and Chris Nolan to do their things with the scripts, and you allow Zach to direct. There's nothing wrong with that. Goyer had a vision. That's the vision that was really tampered with, if you want to ask me directly, and we didn't get that. Now, I don't believe... Now, the original plan was to have a Man of Steel sequel kind of quick, smart, as soon as possible. Now, they were trying to be lazy in a way. They thought we could do a Man of Steel sequel and introduce Batman at the same time. They didn't want to take their time. So the reason it's called Dawn of Justice is because they literally decided to do a Justice League movie very quickly, right? And so this is when it becomes a bit problematic. You're supposed to kind of have hints for a Justice League, but you haven't launched their individual movies or anything, so you have to squeeze them in these kind of cameos in BVS. Now, for me, I thought the CCTV stuff of Aquaman and The Flash and the other stuff that they did with Cyborg was great. But I think to an audience's point of view, it's when they've seen the MCU introduce these characters so well, it's the logical thing to do, isn't it? And they didn't want to do that. They rushed. That's not Zack's thing. That's not Zack's fault. That's not David Goyer's fault. It was the studio. The studio were wrong. This studio needs to allow storytellers to do their thing. They're bureaucrats, right? They sign the checks. They make the big decisions, and that's fine. But once bureaucrats interfere in storytelling, you have a big problem. And the first bit of the interference was removing David Goyer, right? Because the movie didn't make $1 billion, let's force Batman in there instead of letting these characters breathe naturally. Because a Man of Steel sequel shouldn't have been greenlit straight away anyway. The next film could have been Batman, then Wonder Woman, then Green Lantern, then Cyborg. They could have done all these individual movies, then do a Justice League. And then a Justice League earns you the right to do the crossovers and the interconnected universe. Because Avengers Assemble, the first Avengers movie, gave the MCU the right to cross over because people had loved this first crossover, this team up. And it was time to really take advantage of it. And they did. And we at DC could have had the same thing, but they were in too much of a rush. And as I say, there's lots of talk of Zack's vision. But Zack visually had the vision for Man of Steel. But as I say, the story's not his. So we talk about Zack's arc. Really, that arc starts with BVS, where he's kind of setting the narrative, but he's bringing in Chris Terrio to do the writing. So you've got two people who have never met before. You've got Zack Snyder and you've got Chris Terrio. And Chris Terrio done these wonderful themes in BVS because he likes going deep. And that's, as I say, I don't have an issue with BVS. I just feel that Goyer was done dirty. And I was very interested in seeing what Goyer was going to do. You know, David Goyer has got great quality. I know people say David Goyer's pants. He's not. David Goyer is not a bad writer. And I think he would have given us an awesome Man of Steel sequel. But I still feel that's a sequel we didn't have to get straight away. Although we did get Iron Man 2 straight away within the MCU. That's how it started. So maybe that could have worked. I don't know. But I do feel that if anyone was going to kind of write Man of Steel 2, BVS, whatever you want to call it, it should have been David Goyer. But they dumped him because of the box office. And so let's get back to discussing what kind of film this would have been. I've already said that I think it would have been a Brainiac story. Brainiac would have extracted the codex from Superman, so you've got all these Kryptonian life forms. What you do with them in the end? Well, either they have to learn to live on Earth, and we're talking about 1 billion life forms, right? A billion Kryptonians, what you do with them. So I think that would have been a great theme for David Goyer and Christopher Nolan to grapple with. And I think it's the theme of overpopulation, isn't it? Of immigration. It would have been a great piece of commentary to deal with. And I think this is the story that David Goyer wanted to tell. And I think it's such a tragedy that he didn't get to evolve his Superman story, because I think it would have been interesting. And I think it would have been less polarizing to the audience as well. Again, I must remind the people in the back who can't hear properly, who just want everyone to say, oh, the thing that they love is great. I love BVS. That's not the point. The point is somebody else had a story. Somebody else actually started this thing, right? And then you wonder, and again, I've got to speak to the simpletons. I love Zack Snyder, but you do wonder if this franchise would have been better off with Goyer doing the writing and Nolan doing the directing. But Nolan didn't want to do that. He felt he didn't have the tools in his cabinet to do a Superman movie in the terms of effects. Now, I don't know. It would have, look, it's hard work. It's hard work to do a Superman movie because of the effects. You've got to have that history, and Zack certainly can make things look great. And Nolan didn't believe he could. So that's an interesting thing as well. But I always remember thinking back how I just assumed that Nolan would direct Man of Steel. But first he went to Ben Affleck. Well, what experience does Ben Affleck have with effects-based movies? So that was an interesting one. Then he went to Zack Snyder. He didn't go to Zack Snyder first of all. He went to Ben Affleck first. That's where the Ben Affleck thing came from. So already you can see that Zack wasn't really that much in the decision-making in the early days as well. So that's interesting. So I think from BVS, Zack had a kind of plan. But I don't think it was a plan that he had from MOS, because that's David Goyer's plan. I think that's I like to speak about truths. So the whole inception of the DCEU was people thinking on their feet. First it's Goyer, then it's Nolan. Start again. First it's Goyer, then it's Zack, then it's Terrio. Whose vision is this? I don't know. And in honesty, I don't think you know either. And this is where it gets messy. Probably, the truth is, if you want a successful cinematic universe, you probably have to look elsewhere. If you want the kind of stories that we got with MOS and BVS, you go to the people that they went to. But here's another problem. They were so focused on the box office, they didn't care about the quality of the films. So they knocked out David Goyer, and then they brought in Chris Terrio. Or Zack brought in Chris Terrio, or should I say Ben Affleck brought in Chris Terrio. And so things keep on changing all the time. So first they're blaming Goyer for Man of Steel not making over $1 billion, and then after BVS, they're blaming Zack. So Zack gets driven off. Him and Terrio come up with 2 or 3 scripts for Justice League. And in the end, they're driven off the property because they don't believe in what they're scared. At this point, the studio are scared. They're scared about the critical reaction. They're scared about the media reaction. They're scared of the mainstream audience deserting them. So already you're in this crazy situation where with BVS, they've cut half an hour of that movie and then they put it back in. Insanity. Already, the people involved in this, from a public standpoint, seem to be a bunch of clowns. Who's running this thing? Is it the studio? Is it Zack? Who's doing these things, right? So at the very beginning, you have these issues. And the whole DCEU was formed from David Goyer's idea, nobody else's idea. There wouldn't ever have been a Man of Steel if Goyer didn't have writer's block while doing The Dark Knight Rises and came up for an idea for a Superman movie, which was Man of Steel. It's Goyer that originated the DCEU, nobody else. These are the things that nobody else wants to talk about. But I like to talk about these things. I like to talk about truth. Now, as I say, I don't have detailed sources or anything like this. But David Goyer was done dirty. And I think we would have had the continuation of what we had in the first film. I think we would have had more. I think we would have had a different dynamic to the Daily Planet. I think we would have used the characters that we saw, the supporting characters we saw in the first film, a lot more. It would have been different with Goyer and Nolan writing this movie. But they didn't. They got the blame, especially Goyer, for Man of Steel not making $1 billion. And this is what we got. You cut one element out. Then you cut the other element out. And every time you're blaming one of the creatives, but really it's your fault. As a president of Warner Brothers Studios, I'm talking about Kevin Sugihara, who I put the blame for all of this. So now we're in this situation where they brought in Snyder. It was Goyer's story. It wasn't Goyer's story. It was Snyder's story. It was Terrio's story. Who the fuck knows? Whose vision all of this is, right? They have no faith in Snyder anymore. They push Snyder out. And then they realign Justice League. That's an utter mess. A bunch of fans fight for the Snyder Cut. We get the Snyder Cut. We think there's hope to restore the Snyderverse. 1 minute we got hope, then we don't, then we do, then we don't. It's that kind of franchise. It's an utter mess. And I've said this many times. It's everyone's, but nobody's fault. Because you didn't have that one body, like Feig, who could come in and organise people properly and organise the vision, and he did that. And Feig got a lot of things wrong at the start, but he learned from his mistakes, and the studio allowed him to learn from his mistakes. So now we have Hamada, and we have the Hamadaverse and the vision of the multiverse strategy. Who knows how that's going to work out? Personally, I would have started again with the whole franchise after Justice League, as we've mentioned here before, but they don't want to do that. It's a bit, it's harder work to start the franchise again, and we know these people are lazy. So can they do it? Can they use a Flashpoint story to realign this franchise? It's a challenge. It's difficult. But when I look back to what happened before, I'm scratching my head, and I don't really understand the whys of it or the truths of it. All I know is, thus far, the DCEU has got, 9 movies, 10 movies, whatever. Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman, Suicide Squad, Wonder Woman, Justice League, Aquaman, Shazam, Birds of Prey, Zack Snyder's Justice League, 9 movies. And Zack Snyder's Justice League isn't even canon to those other movies. So it's messy, right? So can a Flash movie, a Flashpoint movie, fix all of this? It seems like an impossible task, but what if it does? What if this is actually successful? I think if it's not successful, they'll be knocking on Snyder's door again. Who knows what would happen then? I mean, I was about to say it gets embarrassing at that point, but I think we've passed the embarrassing stage, haven't we? It just goes to show you that Hollywood right now is full of a bunch of executives and creatives who really haven't got a shadow on what these executives and creatives had when I was growing up. When you see Spielberg's E.T. and Spielberg's and Lucas, Indiana Jones, or Lucas's Star Wars, Lucas was allowed to do whatever he wanted, right? And they didn't interfere with him. And if they did, they'd be in trouble. We know the stories of George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. Robert Zemeckis with Back to the Future. These people had imaginations. And luckily for them, they didn't have the problem of representation and inclusion to deal with. Because it is a problem. As bad as that sounds, me saying that, it is a problem. Imagine being a creative, right? And you've got people breathing down your neck. Make sure this character says this. Make sure they identify as this. Make sure that person looks like that and doesn't say this. It's impossible these days to focus on the art, to focus on the story. These people, these creatives, I don't envy them. I feel bad for them. I empathise with them, what they've got to deal with. No one's saying that representation and inclusion is wrong, but it complicates the matter. Who do you include? Who don't you include? These are the questions people are asking. And the business is being hurt by this as well. Now, when you look at the optics of it, it doesn't look that way, but that's the situation. So I just feel that the DCEU is just an example of how untalented the industry is right now. You've got the people who write the checks. Do people write checks anymore? I don't know. But you've got the people who write the checks who are absolutely clueless. Because if they wasn't clueless, and I don't know who was in charge of Warner Brothers when Man of Steel went into production, but as a studio, you've got to make the decision. Who's going to run this franchise? Is it Zack Snyder? Are we going to bring another comic book person in? Who's going to run this? And whoever's going to run this, we better make sure we get that person right. That we employ the right person to mould the clay. But they didn't. They brought in Nolan. Nah, I don't want to mould it. Here's Zack Snyder, but we don't want Zack Snyder. Well, if you don't have him, I'm gone, and I won't work with you again. That's the problem. So that's the problem of the DCEU. The DCEU is like a car that nobody seems to be able to fix, and they keep on asking a different person to fix it. Well, now Walter Hamada has been tasked with fixing it, and Andy Muschietti has been tasked with fixing it via Flashpoint. Can it be done? Well, it's going to be difficult, but if they fix this dud, then I'll tell you what, they deserve everybody's respect. So as we all know, Christopher Nolan had a big falling out at the beginning of this year because Warner Media decided to break the release window, which meant they were going to release movies on HBO Max at the same time as they were going to release them in movie theatres when movie theatres were open. This was a decision made because of the pandemic, or so they claimed. This pissed off Christopher Nolan because Christopher Nolan believes in the release window. So it looks like Christopher Nolan will not be working with Warner Media or Warner Brothers ever again. That's a very, very sad thing, and it's a massive loss. Now, I don't agree with his reaction, but he's passionate, he's a legend, he's a genius, he has every right to have his opinion. I just think he went a bit too aggressive at the studio. Now, according to Netflix, Christopher Nolan has been talking to Netflix about having some kind of arrangement and deal. The problem is, as Netflix have said, without a proper global release strategy for movie theatres, Nolan isn't interested. It's too important to him. Now, it's not impossible for Christopher Nolan to do a deal for his film, for him to make films with Netflix. How could this work? Well, Netflix do release sometimes a certain amount of their films in theatres. What they would have to do is come up with a package for Christopher Nolan to be able to release his movies globally in movie theatres for about a month, right? That's a kind of package. Or maybe they could come up with a package for their movies all round, that some movies could be in cinemas for a month or so from big directors. Now, this would be a big win for Netflix because this means your big elite directors would want to work with you, right? Because they know for about a month their movies will be theatrically released, theatrically released, and then they go on to Netflix after a month. This would be a big deal. This means Netflix could work with the most elite directors, and they're working with a lot of elite directors now. So I think if they can do this, it will be massive because Christopher Nolan wants to work with somebody else. He doesn't want to. He's got the right arse with Warner Media. Warner Media did what they had to do to get the release window moving again. Now, I've defended this, but there's no question they tried to do this to jumpstart HBO Max as well. Because they didn't have any events. They didn't have a Mandalorian. That's their mistake and their problem. They launched a year too early. They were rushing. Like this studio rushes with everything, right? I stand this studio and I feel so embarrassed at times at some of the decisions they make. And I defend them as much as I can because I feel an affinity and a loyalty to them because I've been standing them since my first Looney Tunes cartoon, right? So there is that natural love for me since I was a child for this studio. And sometimes I even kind of bite against my fellow Snyderverse fans when they say WB, WB, because there's something ingrained inside of me to defend this studio, even though I know that they're their own worst enemy. So Warner Brothers has lost Christopher Nolan. So how do I see this going? Well, I see this going, I mean, he may be going to talk to other people. I think Netflix would be great for Chris. I think if they can do a deal where his movies can be released, can have a global release for about a month and then go on to Netflix, that will be brilliant for Chris. Otherwise, he's going to go somewhere else. The last thing we want to see is him going to Disney. I don't see how that would work. Maybe if he worked with the 20th Century Fox banner. It'll be interesting where he goes. Of course, the perfect scenario would be for him and Warner Media to mend some fences. Can that happen? Seeing, the breaking of the release window is over at the end of this year, fingers crossed. So that wouldn't be an issue anymore. He obviously is holding it against them that they did it in the first place. But they did try with Chris and the release window with his last movie. What's it called? I forgot. Tenant. That's right. They did it with Tenant. God, I forget anything, don't I? Anyway, they released Tenant, right? in the movie theatres, a total real, a proper, real release strategy. And it didn't work. It didn't make enough money, but they tried. So they tried to accommodate Chris with that. And they realised it didn't work and they couldn't do it again. So from the moment he found out it was a full-time breaking of the release window for 1 year, he lost his shit. Now, I understand if he's got this integrity about releasing movies in theatres, I get it. But also he's got to understand where we are now. It's like the Second World War. Nobody could play football. A lot of the iconic stadiums we see today were bombed by the Germans, were bombed by the Nazis. And I think we are in a bit of a Second World War situation here, aren't we, in the world with COVID? It's halted our way of life. And we all have to stand up and be there for each other and understand each other's decisions. But Chris didn't want to do that. So, I don't know. Is he a COVID denier? I don't know. Surely he understood it wasn't possible for the company to carry on like that. And at least Warner Media had the guts to come out and break the release window and get these releases moving. Otherwise, you've got a bunch of movies just piling up without being released. But we will see. Christopher Nolan is very, very talented. I have a lot of respect for him. But he's also got to understand the problems of releasing movies right now. Now, we know that more and more movie theatres in America and the rest of the world will be opening. Obviously, movie theatres won't be opening anytime soon in India because, it's terrible over there right now. So everyone's got to do their best to help out. All the global governments have got to help countries like India. So this is not just about movies. It's so we can get our way of lives back, the way we live our lives. It's important. Right, that's that. Finally, what I want to talk about today is Falcon and the Winter Soldier, because I want to talk about something that I thought about when I woke up this morning. I'm always on the top of my thoughts and theories when I wake up in the morning. And so, Falcon and the Winter Soldier is a really weird show. Structurally, I mean, it's odd because we start off with this unique story. Chris Evans, his character is gone. We know that the shield was given to Sam at the end of Endgame. So, as far as I was concerned, when we saw him again, he would be Captain America. That wasn't the case. So we had this new Captain America revealed, right? And you kind of think, well, this is deep. This is interesting. And then you kind of saw how that played out. And then we got the whole... I think this show peaked when Zemo and Sam and Bucky teamed up. And I think from the moment they decided that Zemo had to be taken away and put in prison by the Black Panther girls, I felt, why did you do that? Why were you in such a rush to move this character out of the focus? He had great chemistry with the other two actors, right? It worked. There was gags. They were a good team. He's a deep character. He's an interesting character. And as I said, as I reacted to the Zemo episodes, I actually think they did a good job with him, because in Captain America Civil War, I didn't feel they did do a good job with him. But they kind of fixed that issue for me. And that was a big issue for me in the days of Civil War. I just thought he was a shit villain because we didn't see much of him. And he didn't say much. So I thought Zemo was one of the most positive things about Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And from the moment that character leaves, it's downhill from then. We have that filler episode for the penultimate episode. They even dialed back on the racial commentary until the finale. And then kind of when you feel that they dial back on Zemo and you think, well, what are you doing here? What is the point of this show, right? Zemo works, have these three people together. And that is my take on that. Zemo was a powerful character and he worked. And I think people were mostly excited about the series when Zemo and the other two characters were together. So why take that away? That's weird. I'm sure Zemo will turn up again in Captain America 4. And that's good, because Captain America 4 needs as much help as it can get. Because I tell you something, Anthony Mackie leading a movie is insane for me. And, let's be absolutely clear here, so you don't go around calling me an ist and an ism. The issue isn't about the man's skin colour. The issue is with the man, with his talent, with his lack of screen presence. That's always been my problem. But at least as Falcon, right, and as Sam, you can get away with it. But when you're Captain America, you can't get away with it. And that's all I have to say about that. And that's it for today. So comment down below, like, share, and subscribe. And I'll be back tomorrow with even more Big Mouth Daily. See you again soon.